Good morning. Today's November 11th, 2024. It's Armistice Day, Veterans Day. Happy Veterans Day to all the veterans out there. And before I say anything else, I just want to say happy belated birthday to the United States Marine Corps. Their birthday was yesterday, November 10th, 1775. 249 years old yesterday. So I have the privilege of holding the title Marine, and it was a very good experience for me. Wasn't always the most fun. I probably wasn't the best Marine, but I served from 2004 to 2008. I decided to join because I was a pretty wild young guy, and I tried college, didn't really like it. Was working a couple jobs. It was late 2003 when I enlisted, and things had just started. Well, things started in Iraq in March of 2003, and here I was, young guy, thought I was tough, and I saw these, Marines and soldiers going over to Iraq to fight, and there were men with families, and I believed, if I thought I was so tough and there were these men that were willing to make the sacrifice to leave their families to go fight, then I should do my part and serve as well. I was a very patriotic young man. You watch all the war movies growing up, and the United States is the best country and all that. And, I wanted to do my part. So I enlisted in the Marine Corps, um, went to Paris Island for boot camp. Paris Island, and I was a heavy equipment mechanic, so I was a pogue. Just want to own that up front. Don't want anybody to think I'm trying to take anything away from the grunts. Those are the guys that are out there kicking doors every day. When they deploy, they're off base most of the time. They're not in the rear. Like when I deployed to Iraq, I was at Al Assad Air Base, and don't get me wrong. I mean, you're away from home, but you had a lot of accommodations that made the deployment not as tough when you were on base. You had access to showers most of the time. You had access to power. Every now and then generators would go out and things like that. But for the most part, you had a lot of those creature comforts on base. So yes, deployments were tough, but significantly harder work for the grunts that spent most of their time at fobs and outside the wire. During my entire deployment, I was over there approximately 7 months, and I spent maybe 2 weeks outside the wire. And that's where it's really tough. That's when you're, constantly taking in indirect fire, constantly out. Those guys are out doing patrols, really working their butts off and taking a lot of risk. So, you know, my hat's off to those guys. But it's because of my time in the Marine Corps and my time overseas that I've kind of become obsessed with politics and become obsessed with foreign policy and the history of war and everything else that's really put me where I am today, to where I'm trying to start this podcast and trying to make videos and spread information, because I don't agree with our foreign policy. I don't agree with a lot of the foreign policy, at the very least for the last century and even a little bit before that. We've really become, in my view, a military arm for large corporations and people that don't really care about freedom or the well-being of others. It's always spun a certain way, like for example what's going on in Russia and Ukraine right now. It's this humanitarian war, supposedly, to take care of the Ukrainian people, but the Ukrainian people have been getting slaughtered. Their resources are already being divvied up by the people that want to swoop in afterwards, that are planning on wanting to come pick up the pieces. You heard Lindsey Graham maybe a month ago, Lindsey Graham was talking about all the resources that they had in the Ukraine, and that's our vested interest in the Ukraine is to get their resources, and you know that's what it really seems to be all about. You know, if you go back to what this day started as, Armistice Day, you know, it was the end of World War I. You know, at the time they said this was the war to end all wars, and that'd be great. You know, there's nothing worse than war. You know, you'll hear people say, "Oh no, the war's good for the economy." Well, that's not true. That's the broken window fallacy. You know that a window gets broke, and then to replace that, it's good for the economy because somebody's spending money to replace the window. But that's not true. War is always a destruction of resources. It's a destruction of resources, materials, lives. You know, all of those resources are being taken from a productive sector of the economy and put into, you know, nothing but a destructive area of the economy. So war is not good. War is not good. It should be the absolute last resort. Like all diplomatic avenues should have been pursued and attempted. And once you make the decision to engage in war, then they need to let the soldiers and Marines do what they need to do. They need to first of all, Congress needs to declare war. You know, Congress hasn't declared war since World War II. So think about that. All of the actions that we've been engaged in are unconstitutional. You know, how's that? We take an oath to support and defend the Constitution, and all these conflicts that we're engaged in are unconstitutional. You know, that was when I realized that, because I never even understood that until after I had been in Iraq. It really started making me ask some questions. And you know, there needs to be a declaration of war. You need to set objectives. You go accomplish those objectives, and then the military needs to come back. We don't need to be occupying, policing other nations. You know, if we've exhausted all diplomatic means and war is the only policy, then unfortunately you do what needs to be done. But I think, especially at this point in the world, we should be able to negotiate through that and come to better compromises and better solutions. And again, I'm not a pacifist. I'm not, you know, some hippie that believes that war isn't a reality. But I'm a big proponent of the old quote that, you know, if you want peace, you prepare for war, but that doesn't mean you preemptively engage in it. We don't need to be attacking people. We don't need to be subsidizing other countries' militaries. You know, if these other countries want to go to war, then let them deal with that. We don't need to have entangling alliances. You know, that was one of Thomas Jefferson's things. He said, "Commerce with all nations, alliance with none." You know, and you can find similar quotes from Washington and all the other, you know, founding fathers, because they knew that that wasn't in the best interest of America. You know, now you have people like, well, he's passed away now, but Henry Kissinger, you know, who was Secretary of State under Nixon and a political advisor for many years. You know, Henry Kissinger says that military men are dumb animals to be used as pawns in war. Now, he said that military men were dumb animals, and then to be used as pawns in war, from everything that I've looked at, it says that was kind of paraphrasing, but that's basically, you know, how we're viewed. You get a lot of these intellectual types in government in these advisory positions, and they know what's best, and we're just the dumb cannon fodder that was bought into the propaganda that they're going to use to send off to these wars. You know, I remember reading about Henry Kissinger when I was first going on this journey of history and everything else, and you find out Henry Kissinger was in Vietnam in the 50s, and you know, you start thinking, wait, Vietnam? We weren't in Vietnam in the 50s. Oh, we were, because that started as is basically a foreign policy problem for the French Empire, and the French decided to wash their hands of Vietnam. But the United States was going to pick that up. So the French got out, and we decided to go full blown war into Vietnam. But now here we are, and it's 106 years since the war to end all wars, and we've been engaged in conflict almost throughout the entire century ever since then. The war to end all wars that actually set up a lot of the groundwork to create the next war. If you go back to really what led to the rise of Hitler, a lot of that can be linked to the Treaty of Versailles and all the war reparations that were placed on Germany, and how those payments wrecked their economy. And even what's going on in Israel and Palestine, that's, you can thank Britain for that. You hear everybody talk about, oh well, the Palestinians and the Jews have been fighting since the beginning of history, and that's just the way it is. And I mean, like, there's some truth to the conflicts between different religions, but there wasn't like a war in that region 100 years ago. Actually, the Palestinians welcomed a lot of the Jews that were fleeing oppression from Eastern Europe and Russia. Like, they used to have these things called pogroms, where basically anything that went wrong, people wherever the Jews lived, people would just blame the Jews, and say it was the Jews' fault, even though there was no fact to that. That's just the way it was. That's the way a lot of xenophobia and racism is. There's no truth to it, but people suffered nonetheless. So they would have pogroms, and people would go to the Jewish neighborhoods, and they would enact violence and destroy Jewish property, and beat Jewish people, kill Jewish people, and that's what led to the Zionist movement. The Jews were saying, hey, why are we allowing to be these people to treat us like this? We need our own place. So that sparked the movement to create their own country, their own land, and they wanted to return to Palestine. And so Britain was making promises to the basically the Jewish population of Britain, that if they gave them their support during the war, and no different than what they do in America, like people trying to get votes, they're going to pander to certain groups to try to get their support. And afterwards, do they really get the support? I don't know, because what Britain did was they made a lot of promises. I read a great book on it called the Balfour Declaration. It was about Lord Balfour, who was one of the foreign ministers of the British government, and he had written this declaration basically pledging support for the Zionist establishment of the state of Israel. And they were just making promises, doing anything they could. They made promises to King Faisal down off the Saudi peninsula, if they helped them to help overthrow the Ottoman Empire, who was working with Germany, that they were going to give all this land to the Arabs down there. And basically Britain was just making promises to everybody about how the land was going to be divided. That whole support for King Faisal and those down in the Arabian Peninsula, that's what Lawrence of Arabia is all about. That was T.E. Lawrence. He was the British officer that was down there working with those people to help lead the revolt against the Ottoman Empire. So, a lot of that, that's early on destabilization, destabilizing a region and making promises to people just so they can achieve their goal, and you saw the same thing with, the world wars, getting United States involved. Britain was always wanting us to get involved, wanting us to help them out. When the United States assisted with the coup of Mohammad Mossadegh in Iran, that was for British interest. That was for British oil interest, and the United States helped them. That was part of Allen Dulles. It was one of his first, overthrow moments of a foreign government. Now here we are, 70 years later, dealing with the blowback of what we did in Iran in 1950. So it's just the fact that all of this stuff is going on. There's so much history that's not known, and anytime you get people on, mainstream media outlets and they start having foreign policy discussions, you'll have every now and then you'll have somebody good on. They'll host somebody good, and the person will start to make a point, and they'll say, hey, well, if you go back to this, and the people that run the news shows, they want to cut these people off. They'll cut them off and they'll say stuff like, we don't need a history lesson on what got us here. We don't need a history lesson about that region of the world. We don't need to know about all the stuff that's been going on the last couple decades between Russia and Ukraine and the expansion of NATO and the squashed peace deals that we could have made. We don't need to know any of that. Well, yes, we do. Most people don't know this stuff. We don't exactly have the best school systems to teach people history. We can barely teach people how to read. It's really embarrassing for what should be the greatest country in the world. And I do believe it is. I believe America is the best country in the world. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And if somebody from another country thinks their country is the best, that's fine for them. But I do have pride in my country, and we can do better. We can have better education. We can have better foreign policy. We can have better economic policy, and we should. And as citizens of this country, we should demand better. And I don't mean demand better as in the government needs to do it. We need to do it. All the stuff that's bad, all the stuff that's wrong, it's our fault. The government only has as much authority as we give the government. Without our consent, the government doesn't exist. The government was basically created just to protect our rights that were given to us by God. Whether you believe in God or whether you believe in just, natural laws or the universe or whatever you believe in, that's where your rights come from. You have the right to exist. You have the right to be left alone. You have the right to pursue, a better life. If you want to start a business, you should be able to start a business unimpeded. If you want to practice your religion, you can practice that religion unimpeded. And basically, once you have something, the government protects that for you. That's the whole purpose of government. And aside from some other services that could be provided for the people that pay the taxes to actually run the government. But anyway, I'm getting off on a tangent there. I just want to get back to foreign policy and what we're looking at, because it just bothers me when I see people's lives ruined because they want to do something good. They think they're serving their country, or they're trying to fix their lives by seeking opportunity within the military, and then the next thing you know, they're either dead or they're maimed and injured, or they're mentally scarred from possibly something terrible that they had to do or something terrible that they saw. And fortunately for me, I was not injured. I had minimum exposure to some stuff while I was in Iraq, but it wasn't anything that I couldn't handle. But I do know some people that have been, and that's when you think about what was the whole purpose of being in Iraq, what was the whole purpose of being in Afghanistan, all this money, all these lives, all these resources wasted, and they push the propaganda fear machine. Oh, if we don't go over there and do this, then they're going to bring it here, and okay, well, if something happens, we can act defensively, and if we need to, but the very broad threat of terror, which could be used unlimitlessly around the world, everywhere, terror here, terror there. No, I mean, you can't be scared of everything, okay? And when you have that philosophy and you think you need to go to war with every country in the world, or you need to be in every country in the world, you start over expanding your abilities. And now we have bases all over the world. We have people deployed everywhere, despite what Kamala Harris said. That was great if anybody saw that when she said in the debate that we didn't have any troops deployed into any combat areas. And then there's this video going around, and it's a bunch of deployed, look like soldiers, a bunch of deployed soldiers, and they're saying, well, what the fuck are we? You know, because they're out there. We're always, despite what you think, we're always out there. We're always getting our fingers into other people's business, and that's where we need to stop. We need to, we need to not worry about the internal workings of other countries. We need to act in a defensive nature. Department of Defense. We defend ourselves. I don't have any problems with certain intelligence gatherings and things like that, as long as it's on the up and up. The CIA, I'd say, probably goes way too far. I don't know exactly all the stuff they do, but we do know some of their operations in the past. Some of them on United States soil, which is illegal because they're not supposed to be operating within the United States, but we know that's been going on. And let's try to move away from this policy of always having to be engaged in conflict, whether through direct war or through proxy wars that we're fighting. And hopefully this is something that we see change with the new Trump administration. I don't know. I'm pretty optimistic from the rhetoric and the policy that I've heard that we can maybe start drawing down support for Ukraine and maybe negotiate something with Putin and get that brought to an end. But what I'm not optimistic about is all the stuff that's going on with Israel right now. I'm concerned that we might see a, huge surge of support for Israel and more war in the Middle East. And that's something we got to make sure we keep an eye on, and we don't need to support that. If Israel wants to defend and protect itself, by all means, Israel has the right to do whatever they need to do. I'm not saying that we should condone their actions. We should not condemn their actions. We just should not support them. And it's the same thing with the Palestinians. I mean, this is a very complicated situation with what's gone on the last 100 years in that region. People want to go back. People like to go back to about right after World War II, right when Israel was recognized as a state, and that's about it. They don't want to go back before that to all the stuff that actually led up to Israel, the Jews coming into Palestine and the conflict beginning. So we just need to mind our own business. Like Thomas Jefferson said, commerce with all nations, alliance with none. So with that being said, happy Veterans Day to all my veterans, and thank you all for your service. And happy birthday to all my Marines. Have a good day. Thanks for listening.